And joining us now for an update on sustainability issues is Dr. Sara Place.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Dr. Place, the panelists addressed how both domestic and international consumers viewed sustainability in the beef industry. How do you think this COVID-19 pandemic will impact consumer food choices in the future?
Yeah, so I think there's been a lot of changes. And first and foremost, I would say I think a lot of people have gotten back to the basics, right? One, because a lot of people are under economic distress. A lot of folks have lost their jobs. Their budgets are a lot tighter. And so they're thinking about how can I feed my family, feed myself, provide quality nutrition. Anecdotally, of course, we've seen a lot of meat cases at the early stages of this pandemic be sold out, right? As people shifted from making food purchases at food service type establishments to retail. And we saw maybe a little bit of panic buying, but also just a big shift in the supply chain. And now as we've seen this bottleneck in the industry with packing plants being affected and reduced processing capacity, we've seen some shortages again. So I think there's a bit of a double-edged sword, and it's a bit of speculation, but I would say in times of crisis, people are probably going back to what they know, which is what they find comfort in, what they know is a good value, and a lot of that has been meat. But there are, of course, risks associated with it too, in terms of the public perception and a lot of the news stories that have been out there about meat shortages and their perceptions about the safety of the industry.
Given all the economic challenges we're facing and even the reports of shortages in meat cases across the country, do you think animal care and sustainability will still be a top issue for U.S. consumers?
Yeah, so I think that part of the question about animal care, animal welfare, thinking about, are people going to still care about these things? I think yes, right? Even though we haven't seen these issues of depopulation or anything in the cattle industry, which I think there's a bit of a misnomer out there about that. I think people have seen images of dumped milk or animals having to be euthanized and have really been concerned, but also from kind of two different points of view, right? One of thinking about we have hunger in this country and we're dumping food, but also people being concerned about animal welfare. And I think, surprisingly, people still care, right? And it's because of that human-animal connection that they have, and they have that relationship with their pets, it may be. But people care about animal welfare always, right? That's not something that's going to go away. And I think that's something to keep in mind is these issues, they're going to rise and fall in importance a bit, but they're always going to be there, right? And part of it is just, it's good business practice, right? Doing the right thing, whether it's for animal welfare, for animal care, health of animals, and the environment. Those issues are fairly stable in terms of they're kind of fundamental. So those are going to probably still be important in the future, even though people are going to be making their decisions based on the hard time situations that they're in as well.
There was a discussion about the metrics we need to use to actually measure our progress with sustainability. I'm curious, how do we move forward with science and data at a time when it be very easy for both consumers and producers to react emotionally to this situation?
Yeah, so science is always going to be important, right? And I think what this pandemic situation has just highlighted is that our metrics have usually focused on things like greenhouse gas emissions per pound of beef produced, which of course can be an important metric, but it can't be the only thing we focus on. This pandemic has highlighted you need to focus on resiliency, right? The ability of a system to deal with shocks. And you have to think about sustainability metrics as more than just the environment, right? First and foremost, it has to be clearly stated, right? If producers cannot make money and cannot be in business, then the whole system is not sustainable. And I think this is an opportunity and a time to highlight that to consumers is when the light is on the supply chain to say, hey, people at the beginning of the supply chain, the people that are raising commodities in this country need to be able to survive economically and financially. And I think that resonates with people because a lot of people are struggling right now. And so that's an opportunity, if you will, to change the conversation and make it deeper and make it more relevant, I think, to the real world, and making sure that these metrics, they are science-based, but they're also based in the reality that we have to be able to have economic viability, right? People have to be able to afford food, and we have to be able to have the people in the supply chain make a living, right? That's fundamental to the whole thing. The key thing here is that it's highlighted that agriculture is essential, right? I think to all of us in agriculture, that's kind of a no-brainer statement, but I think it's becoming very clear to people, like when push comes to shove, it's like, do I have shelter? Do I have water? Do I have food? And this situation has made that clear, right? That agriculture and food production is really, really key.
Greenhouse gas emissions have always been a driving force in our discussion around sustainability. And I'm curious, as we've seen planes, trains, and automobiles actually grounded the last couple of months, has that given us an opportunity to demonstrate that beef production really isn't the leading cause of greenhouse gases?
Yes, so the pandemic situation has really highlighted that, again, agriculture is not a major contributor in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, and we've definitely seen images on the internet of clearer air in major metropolitan areas like places like Los Angeles, right? So burning fossil fuels is a major driver of air pollution in terms of particulates, and that's where we've seen these shots of clearer air, right? So things like nitrogen dioxide, which is not a greenhouse gas, but does have impacts on human health and especially respiratory health, which is very relevant at this point in time. And then specifically on greenhouse gas emissions, if we look at the EPA data, 75, almost 80% of the U.S. greenhouse gas emission budget is from burning fossil fuels, right? So that is the elephant in the room when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. Animal agriculture is only 4.5%, 5%, beef specifically about 2% of emissions that come directly from cattle and their manure. So that's what's really key for people. And I think it's highlighting, again, eating is essential. It's not optional. We can't eat our way out of climate change, right? It doesn't matter if somebody eats tofu or they eat a ribeye steak every day, right? It's not going to make a big difference in the greenhouse gas emission budget. And I think this is an opportunity with the data that we're going to see, again, even though it's a terrible experiment, but it is a way to highlight how fossil fuel combustion is really the driver here. It's not animal agriculture. It's not beef cattle, right? We have a contribution and we can work to reduce it. And American cattle producers already have. They made tremendous strides in terms of improving efficiency and reducing environmental impacts per unit of beef production. But again, I think that's what's key for folks to just say, we're going to continue on this path of getting better, but we are not the major contributor, right? And I think it's just putting those things in context for people. Again, this terrible situation will probably help do that because the data are going to be clear, right? There's still the same number of cattle. There's still the same number, roughly the same amount of agricultural activity. What's changed is all the other things that we do in life that sometimes are superfluous activities, right? Flying on airplanes, taking your vacation, right? Not essential activities.